and welcome to another episode of TV Talk. I'm today's host, Cooper Tennant, here to talk about the most recent addition to the Star Wars universe, the Book of Boba Fett. It stirred up quite a lot of conversation as of late, and I've got Kiely and Luis Pagán-González here with me to talk about it. How are you guys doing?
I'm doing well. I have a lot of opinions of the show. I think we both, all three of us do, and we each, I think, can give valid opinions, both constructive criticism and good compliments for the show. So I'm ready to go.
Yeah, I'm pretty much the same way. Yeah, opinions of varying levels of positivity and negativity, but yeah, we'll get into the specifics later.
I agree. When it comes to like the Mandalorian, I'm very, it's a net positive for me, but this is a bit of a rocky road. So we'll go ahead and get right into it. This first bit's gonna be spoiler free. We'll keep it as vague as we possibly can. Overall, let me ask Chris first. Did you enjoy the show?
I was okay with the show. As I mentioned, there are some stuff that bugged me. So we'll just continue to keep this spoiler free. I felt that my feelings towards the show really balance upon the title of the show, because I think the title makes it feel that it's entirely about Boba Fett, when actually you go into it, as you go on, he becomes really secondary to the show. Now, if the show were titled, Star Wars Tatooine Adventures or the Book of Tatooine, I would feel better about the show. But just to give an early opinion on my enjoyment of the show, it was solid, but the title really took away a lot of points for me on my overall enjoyment of it.
I feel somewhat similar on that, where it's like it started off very strong with Boba Fett's involvement. It's very clear that he's the main character, but he starts to feel almost like how he was in the original trilogy, where he has 5 minutes of screen time and like a couple lines. It's not as bad here, but it was getting to that point where people were like, well, he's going back to how he was when we were first introduced to him, kind of just a background character. And it made sense then, but now it's like a background character to his own story is a little iffy. So yeah, that's kind of like my main drawback on this show.
I'll agree. I was really excited for this because I think a lot of people like Boba Fett just because he looks cool, and that's all we ever really had until season 2 of The Mandalorian, where they brought him back and he started. He still looked cool. He didn't do much, but he still looked cool. And so I was hoping that this show would give him something to work with, and I think they do a lot of good work regarding character. Like they give him a character. They show that he's grown, I guess, as a character, even though we didn't really have one before. I like the fact that he's become more of like a stoic leader as opposed to just like a bounty hunter, keeping it vague, but he talks about how he was sick of the bounty hunter life because of, he watched his friends die for years, and he was sick of being told what to do. So he kind of decided to take up the mantle of, I'm assuming you've seen the end of Mandalorian season 2, but he kills Bib Fortuna and takes over Tatooine as like the daimyo, the crime boss. And I liked all that, but it kind of drags. It really kind of drags, and it feels like they're almost running in place for a couple episodes. And it's like it's really slow at the beginning, and then the last 3 episodes kind of slam like a lot of it into the finale. And it just didn't feel very natural to me. But speaking of the actual character of Boba Fett, judging by the fact that there was nothing to go off of, how do you guys think that the character was handled?
Yeah, I'll go first. So really, when it comes to Boba in general in the movies, you have about 2 minutes of screen time for him. And in those times, he always has this, mystique look of just, in the background, just looking cool and having this costume that's clearly different from like a stormtrooper that you immediately catches your eye. And when he was shown finally he was obviously shown in like cartoons throughout the early and mid 2010s. But now when he came back into reality in like real production, I think that it was poor. because, as we mentioned, he kind of gets sidelined as a character in his own show, and that final 3 episodes kind of get very jumbled up. The first 4 episodes, people have it's a really high, low. It can be very divided on the ideas of it, but it is originally, you have to credit that it is strictly focused on Boba. Towards the last 3, it kind of goes around from focusing on Mando to Luke to Baby Yoda, and sadly, they're the most interesting episodes. And I think that ultimately what hurts this show is this idea of, when you look at Boba in the movies as a quiet guy that's choice with his own words, he's cold-blooded and he's unpredictable. That mantle has had a changing in the guard with Mando, where he's really that dude. He's that guy that everyone is just in love with.
I definitely agree with that. While I do think that the beginning of the show nailed Boba Fett, because as someone who grew up with the Clone Wars was my entry to the Star Wars franchise as a whole. And Boba Fett was featured in several episodes in that show, following his appearance in Attack of the Clones, and it like shows that he's like, even at a young age, he was forming up his own reputation as a bounty hunter and as a hired killer, basically. But I like how, despite Boba Fett now, when like canonically he's like in his mid to late 40s, he's going away from that life, but it still like is holding some bit of character that we saw in the Clone Wars, because there were like a couple of episodes where he was showing that he deeply cares about honor, because it was one of the main things that his father Django had taught him, and that is something that can really be shown in this show, and his care for honor and family, which is something that he has both been taught and lost because of the death of his father in episode 2, and how he never really felt any sort of connection with the clones, even though they're technically related to him. So for all this time, he didn't really feel like he had a family of his own, but we see in this show that he is able to make one. And unfortunately, like, that family, starting out with the Tusken Raiders, the Tuskens that first capture him, but then he befriends them, and that they raise him and teach him his customs. First of all, I would just want to say I loved all of those flashback sequences, amazing. But it was also heartbreaking to find out that they were all just like wiped off and taken away from him. And so that sort of like gives a slight motivation of him trying to make a new family after that, while also trying to make some profit off of it as well.
Yeah, I agree with Luis there about how it is great, I think, and how they transition him to after, he's in the Sarlacc pit, which is a great opening scene. I think that first 5 minutes of like finally like solving that story that everyone was always saying for really decades about, like, if there's anyone that could get out of that pit of where you're being digested for thousands of years, you'd think it's him. But they do a great job of showing his code of honor. And when he's living this undisclosed amount of time with the Sand People, he becomes very tribal and he becomes very respectful with the Sand People. I think, honestly, when you look at them, they're the biggest winners of this episode. And they really showed in this show that when it came to Tatooine, they gave it culture, which I really like that the Star Wars, these TV shows have started to do. And really spin-offs of the non-major movies, they start to show that these planets aren't just like senseless areas of just flat-out battles. These areas have culture. Obviously, Tatooine was formerly a planet filled with just massive water, and now it's become dried out. I really like in that story that they connect Boba to like learning culture and with the Sand People.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and that's one of the things that, like, it makes sense for him, towards the end of the show, for him to be so much about respect, because he was shown respect by the Sand People. Like, obviously not at first, but when he saved the child Tusken Raider, he was shown respect by them, and was raised by them, and was taught by them. So I really loved all that. Luis, I'm glad you brought up the Clone Wars show, because we'll jump into spoilers here. This is something I've been dying to talk about. A certain character shows up in the second to last episode that I was above and beyond excited to see. Cad Bane, the bounty hunter, shows up, and I I had my fingers crossed
You weren't
when
the
the
only
show was
one, by the way.
announced. I'm sorry.
You weren't the only one. I think everyone, when
Oh yeah.
that scene of like where he's doing like the good, the bad, and the ugly, like
Oh yeah.
walk into town, everyone's just like, oh
Yeah. No, it rocks. I think that episode handles him really well. I think that episode does a really good job with like the mystique and like the kind of power that he holds as like a figure. I personally like he gets killed in the finale. He gets stabbed. I didn't have a huge issue with him dying because he's like 70, so he's old. But it makes me wonder like what we could have had, because most people who are watching this probably haven't seen the Clone Wars animated show. I feel like my mom watched this and she didn't know who the blue guy was, you know? So I feel like it's almost too much to rely on people to know who this character is, only for them to kill them in the next episode where he doesn't really do anything, you know? Like imagine if Bane could have been a threat from the beginning of the show, you know? Like he shows up in the first or second episode and he's automatically set up as a secondary antagonist, a bounty hunter who has stuck with being a bounty hunter all these years while Boba Fett has kind of decided to move on. I just think that it was such a missed opportunity, and I'm not one of those people that's like, oh, I could have written it better, but it seems like money, like it's money that you could just take, and it didn't make much sense to me. But what do you guys think? What do you guys think? And you can feel free to talk about anything about the finale. We don't have to stick to just Bane.
I'll go first on that. I honestly agree. While I loved Bane's inclusion, I do feel like it was a bit odd that he showed up at the almost end of episode 6 and then shows up a couple times in episode 7 and then gets killed off. The fight, honestly, I thought while some people's like, oh, it ended too quickly, I thought it was cool because like the whole episode was kind of building up to that, and then they had a very quick match, and then I loved how Boba Fett was unable to rely on his like more modern skills, like with his bounty hunter armor, his Mandalorian armor. I mean, his flamethrower or his guns, because Cad Bane is able to circumvent all of that. Instead, he relies on the skills that he learned with the Tuskens and takes out his gaffy stick and is able to knock Cad Bane off of his feet and then stab him for the finishing blow. I thought that fight was perfect. But I will definitely agree that it would have been a lot more impactful, especially for people who were unfamiliar with him, whether it's from the comics or just the show, from the Clone Wars show. It definitely would have been a lot more impactful if like they would have teased him as working with the Pikes or being connected to the mayor of Mos Espa at the end of episode 1 or episode 2, because that definitely would have given him like a much more semblance of a character. And like I was watching a lot of videos on YouTube while the show was being released over time, and some people were like, "There's not really a general plot here. Like, there's no real motive other than, oh yeah, Boba Fett wants to start up a crime family, and it's not easy. There's no real like stakes here." And I definitely feel like if Cad Bane showed up much earlier and would have made his presence known to Boba Fett, who also has his own personal connection to Cad Bane, because there was a time that Cad Bane raised him following the death of Jango Fett. And so that would give a lot more personal connection to Boba Fett with the rest of the show, besides the flashbacks with the Tusken Raiders. Because other than that, the only connections he has are Fennec Shand, who he saved during the events of Mandalorian season 1, and the Jabba's crime family that he used to work for, and then he just like Jabba's already dead, and a lot of the people on the sail barge died except for Max Rebo. He's managed to live. And it's really just Bib Fortuna, and then he's immediately killed in the end credit scene of Mando season 2. So it's like there's not much of a connection besides the Tuskens for Boba Fett. But the Tuskens have already been wiped out, and like another slight story element that was revealed is that Boba Fett thinks it's a bunch of bikers who did it, and he just eradicates them all without mercy,
like murders them.
Exactly, just annihilates them
goes
with
in the slave one, and he's just
exactly.
just murdered.
but like what he knows is that he has avenged uh his family, basically the Tuscans. But so I'm not particularly like sure what else he would have wanted from Tatooine other than to just start up a crime family, which is like kind of it's cool, but at the same time it's like Boba Fett's much more much more dynamic character than just that.
Yeah, Luis said something that I really was annoyed with, and that this is something that's like in Disney's previous show of Hawkeye and Marvel, where the main villain isn't shown until like the second to last episode, and it really lacks there being a threat throughout the show, because you obviously think of uh Boba Fett as this just world beater, so that when he's facing these bikers, you're just thinking that it's just obviously main character versus just inferior characters. It doesn't really give you a type of something to really look at. If they were to have done slight shots of, say, Cad Bane with his back turned at the end of an episode, of like, just mercilessly just destroying through these family of Tuscan raiders, that I think would have been able to stretch out. And you're like, dang, who is that person? Who is that person? To that 7th episode point, you're like, that's who it is. That makes it all sense now. But overall, I do agree a lot with what Luis said. Now we're going into the show in general. The areas that I have a bit of concern with, I think it's the amount of fan service. That there are areas where they do give it a lot well. I like the finale where you have that combination of almost like the destroyers with like the shield and like an ATST type level thing. You just like go smash them together and just like, this is what we're gonna use. That I thought was really cool. The fan service of having not the Starlight. What's the thing in the in Jabba's palace?
Oh, the Rancor.
The Rancor. Thank you. The Rancor is good, where they're hinting at it. He wants to ride it. He eventually rides it. And the last part that I would say that annoys me is that there is at point, I think, too much fan service, where unnecessary, I felt, of they just kind of did putting in Ahsoka. I didn't really think that she was necessary for this. That was sort of just Disney wanting to we're just going to connect all of these shows. And this might be, I don't know how people might feel, but I really dislike how they deal with Luke Skywalker and him being his voice. It seems just very strange. Like it's a combination of almost like a video game audio, to the point of like you're hearing Mark Hamill's voice, that it makes it really hard to feel that it works. But due to, I think when Disney looks at their movies, Rogue One, which sort of does that with General Tarkin and others, they're like, oh, that show did well. We need to keep doing this. Versus Solo, where they don't have Harrison Ford. They have they have him as a younger version. They're like, oh, that didn't do so well. And I feel that that's really something that Disney just doesn't get with its fans, that they don't like it when you go so far as trying to have previous characters and just have like their digitized CGI version.
Yeah, I'll agree. I think I'm glad you brought up Luke. I think it's interesting. We're about almost 20 minutes in. We haven't even brought up Luke Skywalker and the Mandalorian. But the more and more I watch, the more and more I wish they would have just casted someone to play a young Luke. Like if Luke has to be in this, then cast an actor and have them do it. Because like it might not be as perfect, it might not be as visually satisfying as seeing Mark Hamill, but I would rather have like a human presence. Like I think the technology that they used looks a lot better here than it did at the end of season 2 of The Mandalorian. But the voice like really got me. And even then there were some shots that didn't look quite as good. It's like it almost sounds emotionless, which is kind of an issue with Luke Skywalker. I thought him and Ahsoka meeting and like Ahsoka being like, like you're just like your father. I thought that was really cool. I think they're obviously setting up for whatever the Ahsoka show is going to end up being. But I mean, honestly, the last 2 episodes, or the last the 2 episodes before the finale are basically just episodes of The Mandalorian, which I was really excited about, but then it made me realize how like how little I really cared about the prior episodes. Like I liked the first handful of episodes for the show, but having him, Jin or Mando, whatever, come back and become the main character again really made me realize how much I love like the original characters that Disney has built in the new Star Wars, at least the shows. But it the ending of this reunites Mando with Grogu, and they set off in his new ship. And I don't mind that because it's furthering the story of the Mandalorian, but it almost feels like it eliminates the ending of season 2. Like I love Grogu, I do,
Oh, sure,
but
yeah.
I was really excited to see what like the end of the arc, like that's the end of him. He took Grogu to his, his people. And what's he gonna go do now? Like he has the dark saber. What's Bo-Katan gonna do about that? And this, it didn't brush it under the rug. It acknowledges it. He's trying to learn how to use the dark saber, which I thought was really cool. But it almost feels like we're back at square one. It's Mando and Grogu in a ship. They're
It's the end
doing
of
gonna go
season
do
one.
something. Yeah, exactly. Like, what do you guys think about it?
Well, now that now that we're talking about Grogu, I can bring this little guy here. But I agree definitely. Like I as much as I love this guy and I love Din Djarin and like all the characters introduced in The Mandalorian, I definitely feel like this could have been like I feel like they could have kind of done away with the Grogu subplot, and if we just had like one episode focusing on Din Djarin and his whole thing, uh I think that would have been okay. And then the next two would be basically focusing on, building like the next one builds up on the finale and Tatooine more. And like as much as I love Luke Skywalker and Ahsoka, I feel like that could have been saved either for Mando season 3 and it opens on Mando visiting Grogu. I think that would have been an amazing season opener, or save that for the Ahsoka show that's still in development. But it's like when you think about Boba Fett, it's like the closest you think when it comes to like the Jedi and the Force is that his father was killed by a Jedi and he was sent and he was hired to kill a Jedi. That's kind of it. There's like so I felt like as much as I loved that episode, it felt very out of place in the show. And one thing that I definitely wanted to mention here is that I feel like a lot of my complaints with this show would be mitigated or at least like dumbed down a bit if the show was longer. And that's something that like I've been noticing with some of the just like the Disney Plus one-shot specials that are like 6, 7 episodes long and that's it. It's like they have a lot of stuff in each episode, but it's either too much or too little. And either what I feel like they could do is that either they could just focus on one thing and stick to it or have a multi-season show, which is why I think shows like Mandalorian are much more effective because it's like slowly over time we're working on like building up the plot and the story in the world as opposed to having to just shove a lot of things in 6 to 7 episodes. Like that's a personal issue that I've had with WandaVision, Hawkeye, and Book of Boba Fett. Like not just with Star Wars, but with the Disney Plus specials. And uh, what was one? I did have one other thing that I was going to mention. I'll bring it up later when it comes back to me. Chris, I'll let you say your points, and then I'll probably mention whatever I have when I remember it. Hopefully.
Yes. So I were just mentioning our overall thoughts. My last thing that I really had it was as you mentioned, the length that it did at times get a little, I wouldn't say boring, but repetitive at times. Those first couple episodes where he does show good amounts of like tribalism and his connection finally of making a family with the Tusken Raiders, but the whole part of like all of a sudden now going into now where he's back on Tatooine, getting out and actually working with the fellow areas of Tatooine. They don't really, I'd say, do a great job of showing what his problems are. They don't really get into that. He's kind of just casually just living a life, and now what his job is palace. I would just like more if they showed right away, like his dilemma of his finally really trying to deal with problems of. They do show the spice, but I would just like to see more of like the effects of it. Like obviously, like if there's like this massive gang that is causing harm and is importing all these drugs in here, you like to see the effects, but I just didn't really get that.
That's actually a good point with the spice, which is something that we've seen in like we've had Easter eggs of it as far back as the original trilogy, and it's been referenced in Solo and the Clone Wars and in the Bad Batch, maybe I think. I don't know. The shows and comics, of course. But yeah, that's like something that we haven't really seen like the effects of. I know it's like supposed to be like some sort of like reference to like obviously really hard drugs, but we've gotten so far is that this is just referencing the spice of Dune. That's kind of it. But obviously everyone's like, we gotta get rid of the spice. We gotta get rid of it, without really showing us that.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of odd. Like I know that the spice isn't like purely a Dune thing, obviously, but like in the last episode, that opens with, or no, second to last episode that opens with Cobb Vanth like killing the mob guys or whatever, and they have the little thing with the spice that opens. I sat there for like 5 minutes trying to think about what that was. Like I was like, what's the sand? Because I feel like they didn't hammer home enough the entire show that spice is kind of the thing that's controlling. I mean, they mention it, but like you never really see it, and it's not really a big player in the show. So I thought that was kind of odd. But real quick, our last little conversation topic. You can do final thoughts, and what do you think is going to happen next in terms of the Mandalorian? Like the show ended with him speeding off in his new awesome-looking Naboo starfighter with Grogu. So what do you think he's up to next? What do you think is going to happen there?
So my predictions are that it is going to be similar to season 2, but I wish one thing they do is limit the amount of known characters. Because when you look at season 1, and what I think makes it so great, particularly that first couple episodes, you don't know any of these characters. There is so much it's just a blank canvas of where the Star Wars crew, they're just able, like Dave Filoni, the great man that he is, of just creating stuff out of his brain. There is a blank slate. And now in this season 3, hypothetically, I feel now that they've solidified Grogu's choice of being with Din Djarin instead of being a Jedi, that you have a lot of potential now. He's no longer needing to search for someone, but at the same time, they also have, I don't want to say madly about this, but I don't want them to just ruin them going and just rerunning the same steps of season 1, where they're just hanging out on Tatooine and just like waiting for, some tornado just comes rumming into their way and they have to like deal with this. So I would like it if they start to, go out further into the universe. An idea would be now that even though that he has quit the quote unquote Jedis, he's still, force sensible, has force senses. I would like it if, maybe he falls into where there are other bounty hunters, people that see Grogu as a high prize or very expensive. They might start to go after him. And now Mando, who in this, let's say this area is no longer next to a Jedi, he is no longer the hunter in a sense where he's trying to hold on to Grogu. He's now become the hunted.
One thing that I'll say is that what we do know is that the whole dynamic with Grogu and Din is much different than in the previous 2 seasons, because like in season 1, Grogu started out as just like a bounty for him to take and then to collect, but then he gets attached to it, and so he wants to keep him safe. Season 2 is about Din trying to find a suitable home for him, but now that Grogu has chosen to stay with Din, it's like, okay, so it's more so instead of Din taking care of Grogu, it's them working together and living together, because they really have a true like parent and child bond that, like, I'll admit, when Grogu literally used the Force to jump into Din's arms, I almost
Adorable.
cried. I almost burst into tears.
It's adorable.
I loved it. Amazing. the one thing, like, Chris, with the whole thing of older characters, I will agree on that, because like one thing that season 2 was, a lot of people were like harping on it. It's like, where's Bo-Katan? Where's Ahsoka? Where's Cal Kestis? I know a lot of people were like saying that they wanted Cal Kestis to be the one to show up to take Grogu instead of Luke. But like I love fan service, especially with characters that we haven't seen in a long time. Like I love how we got Black Chrysanthemum in this show
Mhm.
from some of the comics, and I love how they keep the scar that Obi-Wan gave him like 10, 15 years prior. But I feel like a lot of people just focus their attention on the nostalgia and not what's actually going on in the present show. So while I do
Yeah, I agree
anticipate
with that.
that, yeah, while I do anticipate that we're gonna go to Mandalore, because the armor did say that the only way for Din to redeem himself is to go through the mines of Mandalore. I feel like our chances of seeing any familiar faces will be low, and I honestly feel like if they are going to be there, it's little and not ham-fisted, because I remember a lot of people saying, like, theorizing if Mandalore had been taken over or just destroyed, and if it was taken over, then oh, maybe it's Grand Admiral Thrawn, and I'm just like, why him? Why would he take over Mandalore? Like, yeah, it's got a fascinating history and all that, but I feel like that would be, save that for the Ahsoka show, okay? Save that for
Yeah.
the Ahsoka show. Let Din focus on accepting his role as the new Mandalore, basically, and work from there instead of just ham-fisting a bunch of fan favorites for no reason.
Yeah, I will say, like, while this show is a little, I don't want to say disappointing, because I still enjoyed it. It did not diminish my excitement for what's coming next. Still, I mean, just in a month,
Left a
2
lot to
months.
be desired. I think
Yeah, yes, it does leave a lot to be desired. But I mean, think into the future, like, we have a Kenobi show coming out. We have some High Republic stuff that they're making, like live action wise. So it's and nonetheless, it's a very exciting time to, be a consumer of Star Wars media. That wraps up things for us here. We hope you enjoyed, and we hope you tune in next time for another episode of TV Talk.